Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we're building up a bit of a cafe cruiser out of this Cannondale R400. I picked this up recently. It's been stored in like a bit of a woodshed. I wouldn't really call it a barn find, but it's been sitting around for a number of years, so it's got heaps of dust on it, and it certainly looks like a bit of a forgotten relic. Under this dust, it should be pretty tidy by the looks of it. All the cable guides on the top tube are intact, and there's not really any bad oxidization that sort of normally forms around there. So one little scratch there from the brake flipping around and rust on the bolts and stuff, but should be quite tidy. So we're going to take off the drop bar and put a flat or like a back sweep handlebar on it. Group set is just this RX100. It has mismatched rims, so the front rim is polished and the rear is just silver. So it does have a 7-speed free hub, but that's enough to do like cafe cruising and stuff. We'll just put a bit of a wider range cassette on there. So we'll be able to reuse a lot of the components on the bike, but we will be changing quite a bit. So I don't really want down tube shifters on the bike, so we'll change to like a thummy. So the bike might look quite big, but as you can see, I'm pretty tall as well, so I could ride this with drop bars though, even at this stem length and stuff, but just to be a bit more cruisy and upright, we're going to put a riser bar on it. So I have quite a few Cannondales now. I do have a black SR300, which is a similar looking Cannondale, and then I also have this SR800. So the reason why I chose to do the R400 that we're doing in this video as a cafe cruiser is because most of my Cannondales look like this, but the R400, I feel like it has a bit of a unique look to it. So it's something just that's typical of the era of that Cannondale specifically. I'm wondering if you notice the difference between this and the R400. Apart from, the setup and the color and everything, there's a pretty big difference, but you might not really spot it, but let me know what you think and I'll tell you at the end of the video. So first things first, we're going to take off some of the dust. I'm just throwing on some muck off, and then we're just going to rinse it down before we get into the workshop and give it like a better cleaning. But because it is just dust, it's not like too much grime or anything, it should just wash off pretty well. So just let that muck off sit for a bit. You can just use some soapy water or something as well. And then, hose it down for a little bit. We're not going to be using the handlebar or the seat and like a few of the other components, so we don't really need to clean those off too badly, but after that, I just let it sit in the sun for a bit so we didn't take all that water inside to the workshop. And you can see some more of the details on the bike. So this taper in the seat stays looks pretty cool. We found a couple little spots of oxidization, or like the paint bubbling from oxidization underneath it. Now that we've got it in the workshop, we can see the paint, so a little bit of a scuff mark on the top tube there. Just going to disassemble the bike now. So cut off all the cables because they're pretty rusty, we're not going to use those. Like I said, we won't be using the down tube shifter, so we'll have to get one of those little bosses or the cable stop boss that we can put on to run a gear cable up to the thumb shifter. So the stem came out pretty easily really. I didn't have to put any penetrating oil or anything down the coil stem, which you sometimes need to do. So pretty good condition. I'd say it's been dry stored for quite a long time, going by the lack of like oxidization and everything bad. I had a Seiko Cannondale, which was really bad, and apparently that was stored beside an air conditioning unit. So yeah, there was the extra humidity and everything. So just cutting off the zip ties for that bike computer sensor. We're not going to be using the brake cables and stuff from it, so we can just cut things and take it all off in one piece with the handlebar. We'll probably reuse this on something else, because a 1-inch removable faceplate stem is pretty cool to have. Bit of corrosion and stuff on the stem itself, but not too bad. You can see here the headset looks like it's in pretty bad condition, but it did turn quite nicely, so we should just be able to tidy that up on the outside and maybe repaint it. So just with the knee up against the front wheel, just holding that in place. Can undo the headset, make sure that's all good before we take the front wheel out. After a little bit of a struggle, the quick release nut, the cover for the nut is like a little bit loose on the nut, so a little bit of a struggle there, but after we get the front wheel out, we'd take the front brake off. It's just a bit easier with the front wheel out. And then go through and take the pedals off. I actually swapped these pedals out. The ones that were on it were the identical pedal, but a lot more oxidized, so I swapped those over. Just checking all the bottle cage bolts now, making sure that none of the rib nuts are loose, especially directly after that Cadex that had the loose rib nut. Luckily, none of these are stuck though, so that came out pretty nicely. Taking the crank cap off, and then we'll undo the crank bolt. Then we'll start working on getting the cranks off. I normally put like some penetrating oil or WD-40 like on the taper and everything before doing all this. I regret not doing it now, but you'll find out why soon. So I put a bit of WD-40 in the threads there and wipe those out to make sure that they're clean. That way we're not going to cross thread the crank tool when we put that in. I noticed it not really threading in properly here, so you wouldn't normally feel resistance until like most of the way in. Didn't really think much of it at the time, but we keep going through. Just use the spanner to get all the way down and then back it off a little bit. Ugh. And that's when it goes a bit pear-shaped. So I notice there's just too much tension on there. So it felt like it was stripping, and it was stripping. So at this point, can't really do too much about it. The thread just stripped, so the crank amp's not really going to come off. So we take the chain off. From here, I'm just thinking of my options. Like I could use a crank puller, but at the end of the day, the threads are stuffed, so there's not much point in reusing it. The chain itself looks probably reusable. There's not enough wear on it to justify replacing it, but I think I want like a nice tidy looking Café cruiser, so we either get the rust off this chain or just replace it with a new one. I can use that chain on another bike where, you know, I don't really care too much about the appearance of it. Taking the rest of the components off while I procrastinate cutting that damn crank arm off, making sure that everything else is going to come off as well. Now we pull out some of the stripped threads of the crank and think about what we're going to do about it. While I really just want to use a hammer and just beat the crap out of it until it falls off, it's really not going to happen. So we've got to take the chain rings off, and then we'll end up cutting it off. I've done this a bunch of times before, don't really have anything against it. So first of all, we've got to secure the crank arm to the frame, that way it doesn't flop around and everything. Then we're just going to mark the cuts with the hacksaw. It's just a bit easier to do than try and like freeball it with a damn angle grinder. I try and mark just outside of where the taper square is inside the crank arm. You don't really need to cut the arm like into 3 pieces. Normally like a bit of heat from the angle grinding will sort of loosen it a bit as well. So you just want to cut as close to the bottom bracket taper as you can. And from there, just whack it off. And sure enough, I didn't even cut into the taper of the bottom bracket on this one and it came off. So it was probably just barely stuck on there. I did try to give it a few whacks before cutting it and it didn't come off though. So luckily the bottom bracket, yeah, the taper's fine. So we can reuse this bottom bracket. Normally I'll end up cutting like into the taper a little bit, but after that I put some penetrating oil down into the bottom bracket shell. I just use like the seat tube rib nut, bottle cage boss. Let that soak for a little bit, and then go through and undo the bottom bracket. So we bolt the tool down and get that nice and secure. It doesn't normally happen for me in the work stand, so turn the frame upside down on the ground and undo that. Didn't take too much effort to get that out. And then we'll go through to the non-dry side and see if that's stuck. I feel like once the crank arm is stripped or seized on there, that the rest of the bike is going to be a nuisance. But luckily the non-drive side was pretty well loose, as you saw there. so I didn't really have any issues there. I thought that this being quite a dry frame, there'd probably be some oxidization stuff in like some of the bits, but looks like somebody's used grease here, so that's good. I did sort of mess up the sticker of the bottom bracket because I forgot to take out the little screw that holds the cable guide on. But we got that out before it did too much damage, but not really a big deal. While the frame's upside down, I decided to give it a little bit of a clean off, and we discovered the serial number. Don't know if that means anything for Cannondales, but I know it's a 1993 anyway. Just based off like catalog photos and that sort of stuff. Taking the seat off. I don't know if this was eaten by mice or something, but there's like a few little eaten parts in it. So I'm just taking this off so we can evaporate some of the parts. And this is everything all on the workbench. I do really like these RX100 brake levers. They look really nice. So we're not going to use that chain. I tried cleaning up a bit of it, but it's a bit too much effort for this setup. So we're not going to use the front derailleur. We would use the rear derailleur if it cleared a bit of a bigger cassette, but 28 tooth is not quite big enough. Chain rings we don't need to use because we're doing just a 7-speed setup, so we use a narrow wide chain ring. And the chain, yeah, it's a little bit too far gone. The bottom bracket we could definitely use though. It's still in good condition. Then obviously the seat guts, we just need to clean those up. Just a little bit of oxidization on them. Just some polish should clean this up nicely. We'll definitely use the brakes. Quite like the look of the RX100 parts, but I'm quite sick of having them. I feel like a lot of my bikes come with RX100 because they're like the lower end stuff. So I've got a new chain for the bike. We're going to swap out a new cassette as well, so that sort of matches everything. The skewers and stuff, they sort of need some evaporust, but should clean up just nicely. Then obviously the wheels look in pretty good condition. They're a mismatch, but not too bad, so should do nicely. So I'm going to throw my hobo gloves on and then get to work. I feel like I don't need to say why I have a hole in my fingers. It's to use the camera. But yeah, stripping out the brakes now. Not going to use these brake pads because they're 100 years old. We've got a cool stop pad for the rear and then just a regular generic one for the front. I like having a little bit more braking power on the rear. It sort of feels like it's evening it out. So just assembling the brake so we can evaporust all the parts of it. Obviously the caliper arms themselves are alloy, so they're not going to rust, but all the bolts and everything are steel, so they're all rusted. Using a little bit of penetrating oil on some of the things so we don't strip everything out. No issues here, just a little bit stiff. Everything's just been sitting around for so long that, yeah, some of the things are just quite dry. So they do have little sleeves and stuff inside some of the brake pivots, so just make sure you don't lose any of those. So just try and do it like an open workbench. I'm doing the center bolt now. I don't know what you call the specific parts of them, but making sure you don't lose anything. The springs aren't really under tension, but yeah, something you don't want to lose as well. We'll put those in some evaporate, so it should tidy up a bit nicely. Sometimes these barrel adjusters get stuck inside the brake arm, so don't try and wrench on them too hard. If it's stuck in there, just leave it in there. Then don't forget to take out this little grub screw that sort of holds that center one in. It's a tiny little grub screw, so try not to lose that. The brake would still work without that grub screw, but it just stops that from losing its adjustment, so kind of don't want to lose it. And all the washers and everything. So it's not in too bad of a condition, but a lot of the other screws and stuff are, so put those in evaporust. As you can see here, the head of that was quite bad. There's some of the chrome things and stuff, they're not obviously going to look 100% new, but we'll at least get that rust off so it's not entirely too brown. First we got to clean off some of the grease and that sort of stuff with I just use simple green degreaser. This is a concentrate, so you just use a bit of water and mix it up so it's like a nice green. We'll just go through and sort of scrub them down a little bit, give them a bit of a rinse off, and then wipe them off. I just use a magnet to get them out of the simple green so I don't have degreaser on my hands all the time. I really like the look of the simple green in the camera here. Looks like jelly or something. Then we're going to soak them in evaporust overnight. I just use, this is just a Nutella jar. You can just use a jar or whatever. Preferably something with a lid, but because we've got the skewers in there, we can't put the lid on as well. Evaporust does sort of evaporate off as any liquid does, like overnight, but it doesn't lose too much, but you lose a little bit of volume. So just give them a bit of a shake up, and then we'll leave those to set overnight. Then the next day we'll take out all the parts, give them a bit of a wipe off, and then some of the things I'll spray paint like a bit of clear coat so they don't rust again. Then other things I'll just put like a little bit of oil on. So normally like big bolt heads and that sort of stuff I'll use some clear coat on, and then other tiny little things sometimes just a bit of oil will be enough to keep them from re-rusting again. It sort of depends on how bad they are. Brake springs I'll clear coat. While those are drying off, I'll go through and clean the frame properly, and then we'll give a bit of a polish up as well. I didn't know what to do about this chainstay protector. It looks pretty bad and it's like peeling in some spots, but just scrubbing up the frame, using a bit of a rag to sort of floss in some of the parts. It's quite a tidy frame. It has a little chain keeper as well. It's a plastic one that they went through the effort of putting on, which is pretty cool. So I did just peel off some of the chain protector parts. I didn't know whether to take the whole thing off, but you know, I would just be replacing that anyway, so it didn't make much sense. So when cleaning the dropout, I noticed there was a bit of a rattle back here. Didn't really feel like it was the entire dropout. It was just this one screw, that front screw there. So we just have to make sure that we tighten that up when we go to put the derailleur back on. So cleaning off some of the tape residue of the chainsaw protector with some dissolve it. You can use like Goo Gone or something like that as well. And then just using that's my dough scraper. So the paint looks like in really good condition, as you can tell here. Just a couple little spots that we need to hit with a little bit of polish. So some cable rub here, but nothing too bad. So you can just use like some car polish or, you know, T-cut or something like that. Just gets off some of the scuff marks and stuff. So you don't want to rub too hard in one spot, like tiny little spots for too long. Sort of rub it a little bit and then sort of feather it out a bit and keep going back and forth until it's all gone. Obviously if you notice any changing of the paint, to back off, but there should be a decent amount of clear coat on the frame before you get through the colour and everything. Just don't use a polishing compound that's too rough. So looking a whole lot better. Still some paint chips and stuff, but it's quite tidy for an old Cannondale. They have a tendency to flake and oxidize all the paint off and everything. So cleaning up the headset now, we'll just do some degreaser, and then I used a wire brush or wire wheel to clean up the headset cups. Then we'll go through with a bit of black spray paint. I think this is a paint and primer in one, so do a couple of coats of that and it should be fine. Now we're going to reassemble the brakes again, and that's the seat cluster bolt as well. Make sure that we sort of remember vaguely where everything goes, using a little bit of grease in some of the pivots and stuff, and then a little bit of Loctite on some of the parts that don't really need to come undone. So the grub screw, also Loctite will sort of help prevent it from oxidizing in there. So definitely on the barrel adjuster, use a little bit of grease because they tend to get stuck in there and then you can't adjust them easily. So popping that back in there. And then that's the brake pretty much assembled. Just got to do the rear one as well, and then all done. So looking a whole lot better now without all the rust on them. Quite a nice looking brake, really. Moving back to the headset now. This was the lower headset bearing. So the cage is pretty beaten up, but also the balls themselves are corroded. So we've got another replacement here. If the cage was rusted but the balls were okay, I would just sort of make up a loose ball setup, but yeah, just easier to replace the cage in that situation. So putting the lower headset cut back in, you've got to be kind of careful with these Cannondale frames. You really don't want to crack them open. So lightweight steel and most alloy frames are pretty fragile, so got to be a little careful, make sure it goes in straight. More so than some of the heavy duty steel. So pushing in some of the fresh grease now, just sort of forcing it in there with your finger. And then loading up this top cup, making sure we put that little seal back in. It's not too vital on the top, just by the way that the water flows through, but still, the extra little bit of seal never hurt. So putting the fork back in and the top nut. I normally wipe any excess and put it into the steer tube itself, because you're going to need grease in there for cool stems. Just putting the front brake back on. Looks quite nice. So you can see there, that's probably what would have happened to the previous zone and created that little paint chip. So spreading a bit of grease around inside the steer tube and then also on the coil stem. This is quite a nice looking stem and handlebar combination, in my humble opinion. This is a SR stem and the handlebar is a Nitto Kite or B355. So you see the Nitto lettering is actually on the bottom side. So you could run this like flipped or either way really, but I always have it facing upright. Quite a cool looking stem. The brake levers we're using are these Dicomp DC135s. Quite a simple looking but classic and classy brake lever. You can get these from Blue Lug or a lot of places that stock Dicomp parts. I was joking about the bars and then tilt these so they can't hit that. There you go. This was in my parts bin. You can see it's a thummy, but it doesn't have the knob. So I think this is actually the one that I had on the 12-speed setup on the Kona Lava Dome. I wonder what happened to that. I thought I had it somewhere, but funny. Anyway, so this is going on. So about the only downside to these brake levers is because they're just riveted together, they do tend to have a little bit of play in them. I'm guessing you can just drill out that rivet and then put a bolt and like some washers to take up that play, but I don't bother doing it. I might do it at some point though. But so the bike came with these 23C tires, but we can actually fit 28s on the frame. Heyo. I hate when lock rings get stuck. So I'm glad this one is not. I don't really like tiny little cassettes like this. So you can disassemble these, so some of them actually have bolts that go through and thread into the. Then you can take like all the little spaces out, or just use the cogs individually. So now just servicing the rest of the rear wheel, we're going to scrub the outside a little bit. The bike is in an overall really good condition. Just some little grime and stuff, but really minimal amounts. The hub itself undid quite nicely, didn't get too stuck. I feel like the Cadex hub last time was quite hard. Just scrubbing off a little bit of grime, and we'll take the rest of the hub assembly apart. Making sure that the cone nuts are in pretty good condition. So the bike has definitely seen some use, but these cones are in good condition, so just want to feel them with your fingertip. What's that called? Your fingernail. Make sure there's not like a hard ridge or any pitting or anything around the cone. Then we'll wipe out the inside of that, and then we'll check that out as well. It's always good to see a good amount of grease inside hubs. Quite like that. So it's kind of hard to show you there, but the hub itself is in really good condition. So just throwing some fresh grease in, then we'll put the balls back in once they're all cleaned up. Again, RX100 parts look quite nice. The look of this hub is pretty cool. It is just a 7-speed, but I'm sure we could swap that out for a 8-speed free hub if we really wanted to. I did actually have some blue Cannondale wheels. They had the Coda Expert hubs, but I didn't want to go with anything too crazy. I just wanted some nice simple silver. So the cassette we're using is a 12 to 32 tooth. This is a really cheap setup, so nice 7-speed, but gives us a decent amount of range. I quite like this lettering here as well. The original bike components. We are spending not too much money, but we're spending a little bit of money on some Panaracer Pasella tires. These are 28Cs. I got these from Blue Lug when I was doing a recent order for some handlebars. Now the handlebars that we're using coming up on the next bike build actually. It's really nice tires, and I quite like how they come with like, little Japanese things like this instruction leaflet and stuff. So making sure that we line up the Pasella with the valve cap. Just make sure it doesn't look too weird. I feel like if you have the tire logos like placed in weird spots, it's a little bit funky. I don't think I'm too OCD with things, but I guess it sort of shows in some ways. But yeah, like the black cassette, I would have rather had a silver one, but that's just the way it came. So anyway, that's a certain coating. I'm guessing it's better for rust prevention and stuff, but yeah. Putting some air in them now. Don't want to go too hard, but I think I ran around 60 to 65 psi in them. So that with my weight means that they're not super stiff. After that, we just did the front hub. That looked in good condition. The derailleur we're using is a XT 8-speed. Before we do that, we've got to do up that screw that holds the removable dropout on. It's like dropout, but it's a hanger. So they use these funky little screws to hold them on. I actually had a spare one in my parts bin as well, so it's kind of handy. After that, just putting the derailleur on. Using this because I know it'll clear that 32 tooth. And also, I like having a little bit of mountain bike stuff in road bikes. And it should contrast quite nicely with the cranks we're using. So there's a bit of oxidization and stuff. But I tested the non-dry side by paint stripping and then polishing it. And it came out pretty well, so we'll do the rest of the cranks too. We might lose the lettering, but ho hum. Don't know whether I should like tape over it a little bit. Not really for my sake, but more for other people. We'll do it a little bit wonky as well, just to fuck with people. So I've used a little bit of masking tape to mask something that I paint stripped previously, and it worked well. Didn't know how it'll work this time. You may think I'm being a bit excessive with this paint stripper, but the last time I used it was quite a long time ago, and it just barely worked then, so I thought we'll just give it a go and try and use the rest of it. Yep. they look better just without the clear coat on them, to be honest. So I'm just putting a little bit of chain lube in here in the crank bolt just to make sure that this works the next time someone needs to take the crank off. So just rotating it a little bit in there. So we're going to use some WD-40 and this grey Scotch pad on some of the oxidized parts. And then once we sort of target some areas, we'll sort of scuff the whole crank arm before polishing it. I did try a couple of sections just with the bench polisher on the oxidized bits and didn't really make much of a difference, so decided to use the Scotch pad. So you can see here there's still a couple little nicks and stuff out of it, but overall it's feathered it up quite nicely. So I'll keep going a couple little spots and then we'll use the bench polisher. I do quite like the look of the satin crank arms, but we're going to go through with the polisher. So this is just a buffing wheel on just a regular bench grinder. It makes really quick work of polishing out parts and stuff, so if you've got the space, definitely grab one. Pretty handy to have. Doesn't take too long, just a little bit of polishing compound, and then that's it. Pretty well done. You can see it's still got some polishing compound on it, but it looks a whole lot nicer. And you can see your reflection in it afterwards. The finest. Simply the best. Oh, the best. Make it back pretty tough, eh? There you go. Do we proudly represent the Vuzai? We got to write Dura Ace on it or something though. People aren't going to know that it's Dura Ace. Just something about converting a Dura Ace crankset to 1x is just funny to me. So using a little bit of anti-seize in the bottom bracket shell, then I'll wipe some on the bottom bracket as well. So the bottom bracket, there's actually two different types of Octalink. So this is the V2, and for these cranks we need the V1. So I'm just sort of putting this in temporarily, and then obviously we can't ride with this. They have a different spline depth, and you can't interchange the two. You'll just end up stripping the crank arm. So for the time being, we're just going to rock this until the other one comes, which should be there, and then we'll go for the ride once the other bottom bracket comes in. Pedals we're using are these MKS ones. I got these from Cam, who does Slow Rides, which is a social ride in Auckland. Quite like these pedals. They're a little bit small, but yeah, I like MKS so much. I have the little spanner so I can service the pedals. The cables we're using on the bike are grey. You might not be able to see it in the video, but they match the decals quite nicely. And excruciatingly careful to try and not break the cable guides on the top tube. They do make replacement ones for these, but a bit of a hassle when you're in a bit of a time crunch to do these builds. You don't want unexpected delays. So didn't really have any issues there. This is the cable stop that we need for the down tube shifter boss. This is going to let us run a shifter cable up to the shifter on the handlebar. Pretty handy little thing. You can get them with, barrel adjusters and all kinds of stuff. These brake levers, we need these little cable stops, which they normally come with, but you can get these separately anyway. So just running the cable up from that back to. So that's it up close. You can see a brake ferrule still fits in there as well. So just running the cables to the respective calipers. I normally run sort of like American style. So the right brake lever for me is the rear brake, which is opposite to what New Zealand and a lot of places run. I like that just for wheelies, basically, wheelies and skids. So we're using Cool Stop salmon, or these are mixed salmon and the black compound rear brake pads. Okay. These are a good mix of like a nice aggressive feel, so like a soft compound brake, but as well as the black compound is a bit harder, so it doesn't wear as quickly, which makes for a really nice brake pad. So just adjusting that to sort of where I want my lever to bite at. From there, just setting up the rear gear cable. So this is just a friction setup, so really we just need to, once we throw the chain on, we just need to set like the limit screws on it. The thing I don't like about these Shimano chains is you use those little rivets to attach it instead of a quick link. Kind of annoying. But just wrapping the chain around the biggest cogs now, and then we can size the chain up. So you just want it to match up and then just add 2 links. Seems to work for most setups, apart from, you know, like the 12-speed or full suspension stuff. So just break that there, wrap the chain through, and then we can put that rivet through. So you just sort of push it through and then use your chain tool to push it most of the way through. Sort of check it a couple of times to make sure it's in the right spot. If you push it too far, it's not gonna feel smooth. It's gonna bind up a little bit. So I test this a couple of times, and then you just break off the excess of that rivet. Just sort of snap it sideways. Works quite well, but it's not really the best in my opinion. But I guess it's quite economical, so hence why they can put out chains so cheap. Really cool. That's that all done. Now we just need to set up the gears. So just flick it through up into the biggest cog. You just want to be careful when shifting it to the biggest. You just don't want to get the chain in there, but obviously you're not under pedal pressure, so it's not going to do too much damage, but even so. And then once it's there, I just use my thumb and sort of push it a little bit so we can feel the excess there. And then we'll just set the limit screw in a little bit until we can just sort of feel it. It should feel about right about there. Then we'll shift it down and then back up a few times and make sure that we're not going to be able to push it too far and shift it into the spokes, because you don't want that. And then at the other end, you just want to make sure that it gets down to the smallest cog and then back up and down nicely. And that's not going to drop off on that side as well. From there, we're just going to throw some lube on it. I normally use Finish Line wet lube because New Zealand or Auckland, it's kind of unpredictable. So you might run into some rain and stuff. The grips we're using are these ODI Attack. They did reproduction ones, which is really cool. So you can get these new, which is amazing. Just using a little bit of isopropyl alcohol to put these on. Then we've got a brown seat to match, which is a charge bucket, which is pretty cool. They don't make the charge bucket anymore, but it's basically a turbo knockoff, but it's a little bit bigger in some proportions, so it looks a little bit funky. But quite a cool looking saddle regardless. They're quite a tight grip to get on. So they have the classic ODI feel, but they're just like more of an old school looking grip. So people from back in the day will probably remember the ODI Attack. Really cool grip. And that's it. Pretty well all done. That's the seat that we've got on there. Yeah, the charge bucket. I thought it would weigh it, because why not? And it's 9.47 kilos, which is lighter than the Cadex that we did, which is carbon fiber, single speed. That's just so funny to me. Cannondales are just so light, like without even trying. I touched up a couple of little paint chips with some nail polish, and now it's off to go ride the bike. So this is a Café cruiser. We're just going to cruise down to the Café. Might take it on a couple of little spots we shouldn't. And you can see some of the fork flicks. It's pretty cool. So I'll talk more about the bike at the end of the video. For now, I'm just going to take it for a little cruise.
It's bugging. It's bugging. That was a bit fucking close, mate. Got a good amount of speed. That's a safe distance to pass right there. Nice, safe 1.5 meters. It's probably like 1 point and a little bit, but still. She's agile. Zoop. Oh, powdered glass a little bit, man.
I forgot to mention earlier, but I did put some paint protection sort of inner tube on the frame, just so when I lock it up and stuff, it doesn't get scratched up, because it's quite tidy.
Pedal strike. Road. Oh my god, the worst timing. Oh god. a geared Cannondale's gonna go. Look at, what do we got, like 40 and is it 12 at the back? 40-12. Bumpy dollar job. I feel like I don't know if we'll be in. We got one more gear. So the problem with this velodrome, apart from its obvious state of disrepair, is being outdoors. You have a headwind one way and a tailwind the other.
So I checked Strava just for curiosity, and the bike reaches about 34 k's an hour on the velodrome. I'm guessing that's in the tailwind section going this way. So that's about all for the riding of today's video. I really like the bike. I should have built up the R400 a long time ago, but I'm really glad that I found this R400 and built this up instead. I still have the R300, so I might build that up in a future video. I thought I could use the R300 steel fork on this if I didn't like the feel of it, but the alloy fork has like a little bit of flex to it, so it actually rides really nicely. Even over train tracks and like little bumps and cobblestones and stuff on the road, it is a really nice ride. It's definitely a little bit more compliant than the red SR800 and other Cannondales of the era that I've rode that are quite stiff. I feel like maybe the bigger frames are just naturally like a little bit more compliant anyway, but this one just feels a bit nicer, which is really good. Because I'm so used to riding steel frames that when I jump on an alloy bike, it's really quite stiff. But this, it feels like a nice balance of not too bad and yeah, still really quick. You can pedal it off the mark, pretty good pace. And as for the setup overall, the 7-speed, it's enough gearing for me. I didn't go down any of the crazy hills, or I mean up any of the crazy hills in this video, but West Auckland definitely has a bunch of hills that we have to ride up quite regularly. Really happy with the paint of the bike. The bike is quite tidy overall. You can sort of see here in some of these clips the metallic look of it. So it has a bunch of different coloured flake in it. Going back to the difference between this and the SR800 on the right there, I don't know if you can tell in these clips what I was sort of getting at. Here's another shot of it to see them like over the top of each other. I'm not talking about like the geometry or where the decals are or anything like that. Might be able to see it here. You might have seen it in the first clip and think, why, this isn't some hidden thing, but I didn't really notice it. But the down tube is incredibly different on the R400 compared to the SR800. Apparently there was some compliancy difference that they sort of built into them, but pretty cool to see. So classic Cannondale for me is the SR800 with the big fat down tube, but this R400 has the skinny one. The next video is coming up. I'm going to be doing up this KHS mountain bike, and we've got the Schwinn, but I think I'm going to do the KHS next. That's going to be a really cool bike. But the Schwinn is definitely going to be a sweet bike when it's all done. The Schwinn is going to be a bit more original than the KHS, but yeah. Thanks for checking the video out, and I'll see you again soon. Aim to get the KHS video up in the next couple of weeks as well, so I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye. Very cool. Fuck.